This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. The title of this presentation is Logan Hall, the Achilles heel. And as the subtitle states, he's the HR director for the Salt Lake City School District. And what I'm doing now, this is going to be episode 1 of a series of presentations that I'm going to start under the title of Flashback Friday. And what I intend to do is every Friday post a YouTube video that compares an issue that I was dealing with when I was on the board about 6 years ago to how things are dealing, how the current board is dealing with it today. So I chose to do this Flashback Friday about the HR department because a lot of the problems the school district is experiencing right now, I believe, can be traced back to the HR director and the way he's operating that department. This is a org chart from 2013, and at the time we had about 25,000 students. Compared to today, we've lost about 2,000 students since that time, but we keep inflating the organizational chart because they keep hiring new administrators, which is bizarre. And at this rate, we have probably about 4 elementary schools open that we really don't need them, but they haven't, they keep dragging their feet on closures. But we definitely, according to the new superintendent, need new administrators to support the shrinking district. And so in this case, here's where Logan Hall fits into the into the organization chart. The director is not anything new. District will always need a HR director. So that's where he fits in. He is on the cabinet of the superintendent that we just hired about a year ago. And so what I'm going to do in this presentation is just show the video of 3 parts of 3 different meetings from when I was on the board. The first one will be June 16th, and then 2 in May the following year, and then look at a couple meetings here that happened here in the last few months. One of the things that I think it's important to cover or that I'll emphasize is the local school board authority to hire comes in the Utah Code, which is state law, board policy, which has the force of law in the school district, the board handbook, which is passed by the board that operates like, it's kind of like their handbook on how they'll operate within the district and with each other, and then the board budget that happens every year that allocates money based on the organization and personnel. And then those things that they agree to in the budget and vote on, those are then implemented, if you will, through the board meetings and the board agenda. Like every year, we would vote on the written understanding, which was for administrators, and then there was a written agreement, which was for educators. And so it was kind of like the union contract, if you will. The written understanding wasn't as strong as it is for teachers. And then there were salary schedules. There's right under 30, I believe, for each different aspect of the district and how much people would get paid. And so when they get hired, they get put on one of these salary schedules that was already agreed to, that typically have their roots back in the written agreement and the written understanding. And then each employee has to sign an employee contract. And then you have the superintendent contract. So these are the things that I'll reference in the meetings that you see as we go through that. I want to point out, too, that we're going to do a Flashback Friday to June 16, 2015, but understand that 3 of the board members that are there today, we have 7 total, and 3 of them I served on the board with. Back in the day. So you have Melissa Ford and Catherine Kennedy and Christy Sweat. So these 3 I served with when, and they're still on the board today. One of the things I do want to mention that I'll do a presentation on at a later date is Christy Sweat is heavily involved with the Utah School Board Association, and the reason I'm bringing them up now is because I believe that for the state of Utah, they are the source of the problem with public education in Utah. And it stems from the fact that they have this incestuous relationship with the Utah School Superintendents Association. These should not be together, but they are. You can even see on their webpage, they use the same, that they're at the same address, even though it's the Utah School Board Association. It's the Utah School Superintendents, and it's the staff. They share the same staff, but it's the superintendents that are manipulating everything for the school board. These should not be together. There's a conflict of interest because in the state of Utah, superintendents are hired by school board members that are elected. And so, but in this case, it's the tail wagging the dog. You have the superintendents that manipulate and create like the training and everything that happens to school board members. And that's where I believe the root cause of the misunderstanding is from board members and why public education is so screwed up right now in the state of Utah. If we can separate this little relationship, this Lewd relationship that's been going on for years, I believe that's the first step into improving the outcomes for our students here in the state of Utah. And as you'll see, Christy Sweat, she's like on the board of the or the Utah School Board Association. She goes to all this training, and she's not very bright when it comes to governance on the school board. So if that's any indication on the quality of their training, there it is. So so let's go on then into this meeting on June 16, 2015.
But Michael's point, I think, is true, and
I do too.
And that we really do not. Where's that line that you underlined?
The board approves.
Yeah, the board approves employment contracts, salaries, benefits. I mean, we're informed of them, but and I don't mind the way it's working. I just don't think this accurately represents what happens. I think this language gives the wrong impression to the public
What's happening.
about what's really happening. Because, we're not, and I understand what you're saying about the consent agenda. I mean, we do say, we do sign off on the agenda, and I do, but I don't think that we really do,
But that's a state law. This is, what you're reading is the state law. The board
approves employment contracts, salary, benefits, and dismissals. That's the Board of Education handbook. So
It's
we
in the
could
state
change
laws.
that language if we wanted to.
No, it's in state law.
Okay, well,
Yeah, this is the law.
Unless you're in the legislature, you're not going to change it.
okay.
Statute.
I will say that I like being able to say that I don't do any of this.
That's
I
right.
really like it because it makes it much cleaner for me to say that I actually don't approve, or dismissals and things like that. But I would like that language to change in our handbook to represent what really happens, I guess.
Well, unless you're in the legislature, you're not going to
No,
change
but this
it.
is the handbook. This is the handbook, not the.
You're
not the-
serving the,
I would say that the interesting thing for me is the perception definitely is that the board is making decisions, employment decisions, and that's not the case.
That's
We've
fine.
delegated that to the superintendent and the business administrator, but I've had multiple people
Right.
say to me over the last couple of weeks, as you know, that there's been lots of changes. Why did you decide that? Why did the board decide that? And I say, the board didn't decide that. The board approves that, but we don't usually approve that. I mean, there are some appointments lately that we were informed about and had the update before it was made public, which I appreciate, but then we still haven't seen on a consent agenda.
Because
if they're promoted to a different level, different salary scale level, or a different classification, then we would.
Then it would say it'd have a change in contract.
So just for clarification for me, when you send out an email to the board saying, just for, confidential update, this is what's gonna happen. At that point, there have been a couple incidents, one recently, where my immediate reaction was to respond to you with my personal feelings on that.
Able to hear, because I agree with you, Catherine, Melissa, Michael, that the perception is that we're making all these decisions, and in fact, we're not. So part of the reason for asking for this context was to open that discussion and see if everyone understood it the same way. And I was aware before, Michael, that you had concerns about the contract. I mean, we brought that up before and discussed it since you've been on the board. It's more complicated than that.
Heather,
Yes.
can I clarify though? First of all, I don't agree with Mikhail's interpretation of what Robson said, because I remember Robson saying twice, and, you know, it's a matter of record. We could go back and look at it, you know, on our own. But he said he said as a board that we approve the placement of principals. He says, and if you have a problem with the placement of principals and you vote against that, he said your problem isn't with the principal, it's with the superintendent. And he said that twice. And then I don't agree with Flo. This is the state law. It's not just policy. The policy comes from state law. And I don't agree that we delegated this authority to the superintendent unless there's some action, like the handbook says, that if the board delegated that, then somebody show me in a meeting where that action was taken to delegate the authority that was given.
And this goes into
state law.
a different topic that we can discuss later on. I realize, Michael, that you feel that way
It's
really
not that I
strongly.
feel. I'll videotape it after this meeting, and I'll quote the law in there. I can show what happens, and then people call me and they go, "What is wrong with these people?" I say, "I don't know." I mean, it's right there. It's in black and white. It's hard.
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda consisting of the purchasing and accounting report, human resources department report, minutes for the board.
This motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes, I made a request earlier to move the HR report to discussion.
Our policy is that it needs to come 24 hours in advance. That's what our board policy says. Did you have a question about that particular human resources report that we can answer?
Well, that I only got a response from the superintendent today, and I wanted to talk about the fact that he's hiring people to new positions without board approval. And they're not showing up on the HR report. And so if I just found out
The
today,
consent agenda is on, the HR report's on the consent agenda. So is there anything on this consent agenda HR report that you wish to question?
yeah, I just did. I mean, that what I'm saying is that I couldn't respond 24 hours before because the superintendent's telling us through confidential emails that he's hiring people for positions, and I'm questioning, whether they're.
That's a bigger discussion, Michael, and a bigger question.
Can I finish without
Yes.
being interrupted?
Yes,
please?
you can.
What I'm saying is that, you're holding me to this 24-hour timeline, then he should be telling us, who he's hiring these positions prior to that, because you can't hold me to the 24-hour timeline of wanting to move that if he's only telling us things, outside of that window.
So, yes, go ahead, Tiffany.
I would just like to say that the hire that you're discussing is not on this HR report
That's my point.
because it isn't official yet, so we'll go on next month's HR report.
Okay. Catherine.
I guess I second what Tiffany is saying, that is not relevant to this particular consent agenda.
And so that's why I had asked for this to be put on the discussion agenda.
I'm
so that we
going to
could
ask
discuss
that
it.
we return to the motion on the agenda and on the table, Michael. And your discussion is not actually to this motion. That's my ruling. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of accepting the consent agenda as outlined, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
And I'm opposed, and I disagree that, that this should have been moved to the action agenda. If we're gonna do that, then the superintendent needs to tell us these kinds of things 24 hours prior.
We're going to go back to the agenda, Mr. Carra. Thank you.
No,
very
but you're not gonna acknowledge what I'm saying? I'm
I've
just gonna,
acknowledged it,
you're
and
not
I
gonna,
understand.
if you guys are gonna play these stupid games, I'm not gonna, submit myself and subject myself to it, because you're just playing games that he's over here hiring people that without
Going-
board approval, and then when I try to question it within
Please return to
parliamentary
the agenda.
procedures. Right, and then you see, the public sees this for what it is. You guys are just playing games. And there's no reason for me to sit here and entertain you guys on this. Because then you don't leave any room to discuss things and to provide the checks and balances that this form of government calls for.
All right, I'm calling for order now. We voted on the consent agenda. Now we'll return
No, if we're not gonna.
to the regular agenda. And And it begins with.
But I did give my specific question at the meeting 2 weeks ago. Like, for example, the student services position that you know, I had some concerns about. I sent you an email about it. And I asked questions about it. You extended the job anyways. Then it doesn't come up on the HR report at the last meeting. I think Tiffany said it would be at the next HR report, and it's not here either. Then that's not a lateral move, correct?
Sure it is. It's actually in that case, and every question you've asked has been answered. And in that case, the individual went from one lane to a lower lane to accept that position as they competed for that along with all the other
And
candidates.
that's lateral? You call that lateral?
Well, it's not a contract change. There's nothing, there was a promotion. You used the language promotion, there was no such thing.
So why did you think Tiffany would be on this HR report?
I didn't say it would.
I don't,
In the last meeting you said it would.
No, I said he should wait till we had all of the information that you requested.
Okay.
So, yes, go ahead, Tiffany.
I would just like to say that, the hire that you're discussing is not on this HR report,
That's my point.
because it isn't official yet, so we'll go on next month's HR report.
Okay.
But it, see, and I don't agree with that, because here's my overall concern is just a fundamental practice of government, that we're elected, we're supposed to provide the checks and balance to the bureaucracy. I mean, it's like, you know, we have the power of the purse, that's why we approve the budget, because we represent the interests of the community. And so we have employees that are concerned about, continue to be concerned about the hiring practices. They talk to people in the community, they call me, and I agree with them that there is some issues going on that need to be addressed. And then the idea is that as a member of the board, I can help correct that by voting against it. But if it's not on here, like, this is the first I'm hearing now that the reason now that this job isn't going to be on there, and I'm not going to have an opportunity as a board member to weigh in. And that's where I think then that we're defeating the purpose of having a board if the bureaucracy can continue to make poor choices, and there's no opportunity to fix those.
And I,
Is that relevant to the human resource
I
department?
would argue that it's not relevant to this human resources report. So,
Well, I know, but I think that's just part of you protecting Mikhail's bad behavior, and that's just not, we have different value system, so mine is, I'd like to pass it to so it can be put in the record.
You know, and then change this, because I do think it should be changed. I totally agree with Michael. I think too many of these are just done, and because we don't have a voice in this, because of this new definition, because this is a new definition under McKell. I really do believe this is a new definition under
that's
you.
not true.
let's stop for just a minute and let others.
But I do think some of these administrative ones that are the ones that are more problematic, let's put it that way. And I do think they are problematic. Because a contract, when you hire somebody as this and then they become that, even though they're on a continuous contract, it's like, well, wait a minute, you know, that's not how we hired. I mean, we approved them to be hired in this position, and now you've changed their position and we've had no voice in it. I think that's where the problem comes in.
It does get
Okay,
here.
we're now on, we're an action agenda on this particular, we're on the action agenda for this particular HR.
Right, and to me, it is relevant to this, because I'm saying, maintaining that stuff is missing on this HR report, just like we've just been articulated by Rosemary, is that, you know, there's some, this is the first I've heard why it's missing, so that's why I'm gonna vote against it.
All right, so there you have it. You know, watching this, I don't miss any of those people or the circumstances. You know, but I have to say that I am, you know, I going back and watching some of these to put this together, I'm still astonished, you know, with their attempts that they use to try to bastardize the authority of the board. And I used to think that they were being, you know, this creative reinterpretation, but I realized at one point it's just deliberate misconstruing of the law. And to understand it in context, yeah, anybody that knew Mikhail Withers or that knows him now, I think he's working up at the State Office of Education. He's one of the most narcissistic and egotistical men I've ever met. And for whatever reason, these women were eating out of his hand. They were loyal to him and rabid about protecting him at all costs. So the issue about education and making policy and helping children, that took a back seat to, they had this, I don't even know what to call it, something about his legacy. And it's like, he doesn't have a legacy. Anyways, but enough of him. But one of the things I should say too, when it came time for re-election, my neighbors, especially my church neighbors, asked me and said, "Hey, I'll vote for you again, but you really got to get along with them up at the school district and be a team player." And because things would come out in the media about some of the conflict that was going on, and I would tell them, I'm going to double down. I said, I'm never going to be complicit with their manipulation and their dishonesty. And you saw that. I mean, what you saw, that's kind of tame compared to what actually would go on at each meeting. Nothing was real because they were dishonest at every turn. And you can see, if you watch even those clips, you can see one, in the beginning, he says, well, if it's a change in contract, we'll put it on there. And then the next year, they just don't put it on. Even if it is a change in contract, I'm the only one that's going to vote against it. So who cares? But they do and there's all kinds of lies and dishonesty and corruption that was going on. And that's what we're dealing with. But then when it comes to hiring, here's a list. And you saw that, we had that conversation in there about the Utah Code, which is state law, board policy, board handbook. And that the board handbook was the one that Catherine kept saying, well, I want to change. I don't like it. I don't want this authority. It's like, then why did you run for school board? It was just the most ridiculous thing. You're going to run for school board. This is what the authority is of the school board. And then you're going to get on there and say, well, I don't like it. I don't want to do it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It didn't then, and it doesn't now. But I do want to say one of the most frustrating things of the one that we're going to see for this October 2021 meeting is when Nate Salazar, who served on the board for a full term now and is on his second term, has no idea what his authority is, to the point that he's going to call up the HR director and say, come tell us what we can and can't do. That's just embarrassing. And I don't understand why. I mean, he seems like a bright guy, but he's not. He's demonstrated that over and over again, and this is just another example of why the Salt Lake City school district keeps spiraling down, because you have elected officials that well, let's just watch it.
With the administrative assistant that is on the HR report that we weren't aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. I'd love to hear other discussion, because I want to make sure other board members.
Can I add on to that then? Just as I think that I support what Catherine is saying as far as, thank you, Alan, for bringing the discussion about Highlands assistant principal. I think that when we have new positions that come to the board, it's always good for us just to know where that funding's coming from, and how that's, because it is a new position, and I don't believe it was posted, so I think that having a discussion about it, although she's already hired, correct? So even though she's already hired, I don't know if it would be prudent for us to do that, or if it's something that, I don't know, if it maybe,
I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. Thank you for your feedback. Nate?
Thank you, Catherine.
I don't have much of, relative to opinion, but just wondering if we could ask our Human Resources Director, Logan, if he could weigh in on the implications about what kind of direction we can or can't take tonight, if you're comfortable with that, Superintendent and the board. Just knowing that position's
Coming to the table Logan Hall. Thank you, Executive Director of Human Resource Services. Thank you.
Appreciate
Mr.
the
Hall.
opportunity to be here. So thanks for letting me speak to that. This position became necessary when you approved the new office and position of the Executive Director of Organizational and Strategic Leadership. And as a cabinet, the decision was made that we needed to staff this office in order to make it viable and be able to provide the appropriate support, which is the direction that we went in order to provide the necessary support for the position to be successful.
Thank you, Logan. And, okay, other discussion to this?
I just thank you, Director Hall, for being here and coming up to the table on the spot. Are there any implications to the position that's already been hired if we don't approve it in the HR report?
Implications of that, we would have to figure out what to do with that moving forward if we well, potentially could be a lawsuit for sure. Yeah. So the person is in place and has an expectation of continued employment.
We're just,
So, I really appreciate this conversation. It would have been good to have it before it went on to the HR report, because I can see, where what you're talking about. And I think that, as a board, we've just always asked that new positions, even though
All right, there you go. It's somewhat laughable and perversely ironic that Chrissy Sweat is now in the Michael Clara role, but in her case, she's allowed and at least treated with some respect and dignity in questioning something on the consent agenda. And you saw that in contrast that, when I did it, they would play all these games and just lie about it and not even want to allow for a conversation about an issue. And then it was just lie after lie. They would have to tell lies to cover other lies. But at least today, you can, now we're just dealing with pure ignorance. We're not even dealing with manipulation and hiding. And in this case, they're just ignorant. And like I said, for Nate to even call up the HR director, and then the HR director gives them bad information, and then Chrissy Sweat, who has, I think, the most senior member on the board, probably been on there 20 years, she's has learned nothing. She just folds. She believes the misinformation and misdirection that came from Logan Hall. It's just bizarre. So it kind of gives you insight into why this Salt Lake School District keeps spiraling out of control, because you have elected leaders that don't know what they're doing, that hire the most incompetent people, I guess, that they can find in their field to be running the various departments. So one of the reasons why I'm saying Logan was wrong is because there is let me go back to this real quick and just point out, you saw in the Flashback Friday portion of this, we talked about the Utah Code, the board policy, the board handbook that Catherine wants to change because she doesn't like the authority to hire and stuff. And then the board budget, we don't talk about that, but that kind of sets the stage for the following year. And then in this case, we're going to talk about the employee contract and how that actually works out in the board agenda. So each person that's hired, and my understanding is this is going on today. It definitely was going on when I was on the board. The contract, that if they're certified employees, the contract says you've been approved for recommendation to the Board of Education for employment to a position in the Salt Lake City School District. And if they're not using this today, they should, because this tells people you're hired, but you still got to get approved by the board. And this is the part where, and the way they get approved by the board is their name ends up on the consent agenda. So here you have the person they were talking about as this administrative assistant. She was hired, and then the thing that just baffles me is that in that meeting, Chrissy Sweat says, "Well, you didn't even post a job." So if they didn't post a job, how does this person even know that there is a job? And if they didn't post a job, that's in violation of board policy. So the board should have voted this down, but they allow this bad behavior to continue. I'm assuming because they're just ignorant. From Nate, who's into his second term, to Christy Sweat, who's been there for 2 decades, still doesn't understand that, and what they should have done is said, no, we're voting no on this particular job or this particular person, because number one, you didn't post a job. That's a violation of board policy. Number two, you didn't tell us that you were going to do this new position. In fact, Logan said that it was a cabinet that decided they were going to do this. And then these people on the board let these employees walk all over them. It's just so frustrating to watch. And so this is where it happens at the board meeting. The board approves people coming in or not, or you don't approve it. And that's what the argument I was having 6 years ago, 7 years ago, members of the board. The other interesting thing that I noticed in putting this together is that you'll notice on the left in 2015 when I was on the board, they put new contracts, contract changes, and releases. So even when they're telling me, oh, well, they're not for the student services director, it's a contract change, we don't put it on that. That was why I was showing that on the board meeting, saying that's a lie. Well, contract changes are shown and are brought to the board. But it looks like when I kind of did a look, not too deeply, but it looks about like 2019, they changed this. They took off contract, new contract or contract changes from the board's HR report and just put it on there. And I guess now they're only putting on their people that come in new. But I would recommend that they revert back to how it was before, because it's important, to look to see who's leaving. And you see the releases, and then you can see if people have resigned or retired, or if they were terminated. And it's important for people to know that. And I remember when, there were employees that had issues and stuff, and people would tell me, well, they're still at the school. And I'd say, no, they're gone. And I knew they were gone because I could refer them to this this document that's public. And so, but now that's not there. So like even now today, there's employees that the new superintendent has hired that people, is she gone or is she still here? And she lied. She probably did stuff that was illegal, but nobody really knows if she's still here or not. But if she was gone officially, then it would show up on the releases. And that's why I think the board should go back to this for the benefit of the public to understand who's at the district and who's not. But again, I think that's part of the thing that Catherine Kennedy wanted. That she wants to have a reduction in the board's authority. And this is the part here where it says that let's see here, the personnel actions, kind of says this is the board handbook, that the superintendent and by extension the HR director are going to run the daily operations of hiring and moving people through the organization. And it says that personnel actions therefore are usually found on the consent agenda because a board is required by law to approve all employment contracts, salaries, benefits, and dismissals, according to the handbook. So that's why, some bureaucrat at the district, or maybe Catherine got her way and they said, hey, let's change this. And you see in the handbook, it says that they do dismissals too, approve them. So that's why that should be on the consent agenda and remain over here where it says releases. And that would be comporting themselves to the handbook. But again, they're letting the tail wag the dog and let the bureaucrats create their own practices, even if they are in conflict with board policy. The other interesting thing that Nate should have known, he's the one that was there for this contract and hiring of the superintendent and made a big deal about it and held press conferences about it. But somehow, I guess, he forgot what was in the contract that they made with the superintendent. In that, they're paying $220,000 a year was the salary. And this is pretty important. It's right here. It doesn't need to be, but it's in the contract. It says the duties of the superintendent, subject to the direction of the board, the superintendent shall, and number 4 says, organize, reorganize, and arrange the administrative and supervisory staff, including instruction and business affairs, as best serves the district, subject to the approval of the board, and with prior consultation with the board, and providing the board with at least 3 days' notice prior to announcing changes. So, Nate, you don't have to ask Logan Hall what you can and can't do. Just read your own statutes, read the contract, read the policy, the state law, and go from there. There's no need to be asking him, and all he's going to do is give you bad information, which he did. So let's just close with this here. This was an interesting. If you don't get it and know what you're doing, then here we have the student board member schooling everybody on why what the superintendent is doing is hurting our district.
Clear. Okay. Mohammed, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so this is more, I don't want to put you on the spot here. There has been questions. I mean, this falls in really well within what we've been talking about. We had families, I had emails received where families were saying, well, why are we hiring upper cabinet and we are considering cutting down the number of teachers? And we would love in a simple language, that an average person in the street will understand. We can explain that to the public. That would be fantastic.
So, and I'll ask Alan to help me with this, but simply a reduction in teacher workforce does not mean a reduction in services and support that the district still has to provide to the schools. If you look at our administrative costs, in total, looking at district administration, those cabinet level members and others, it's 0.46% of our budget. And so while people simplistically think, well, if you didn't hire those 2 cabinet level positions, that is teachers in the classroom. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it.
All right, Dati.
Yeah, sorry, I was confused for a second. So these aren't additional cabinet level positions, right? Like they already existed before?
These are cabinet level positions that were added at the beginning of the school year.
Okay, then I can see why there is some form of concern, but I do appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dati. Go ahead, Catherine.
I just wanted to add in that I appreciate the explanation too, but I do think that the public, is concerned that in a declining district that we are adding administrative positions. And while we do need to support our students, we have been doing that without adding them in the past. And so I do think that it's a legitimate concern that people have, and I just hope that the superintendent and the superintendent cabinet think about it very, very clearly and strongly, that that's the feedback we're getting from the public really clearly right now.
Right, and that's why I explained that the percentage of administrative costs for those positions is pretty negligible when you look at the whole of the budget.
Dati?
Yeah, I would kind of just agree with that. I've also heard a lot about how teachers are feeling as well, because I'm in the schools and they're teaching me. And I think that's definitely a concern that I share with them. I understand, I think the goal of the board is to do best for our students, but I think that also means the way that we're being taught in classrooms as well, and having really large class sizes. I go to classes that have so many students, and so I think there is a concern that I think is well-founded, especially because in the history of the board, I don't think we've added that many cabinet positions that quickly. And then also I think, yes, we can explain it using percentages, but when you're not using those percentages to compare to the pay of teachers as a percentage of the budget, then I think that kind of minimizes the effect that it has on our board as well as our students. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. I think we've all been hearing those concerns, and so I think it's important that you hear them and know how to respond. Thank you so much. All right.
All right, closing. let me just point out that this article came out recently last week. Utah NAACP president asked DOJ to investigate allegations of discrimination at the Salt Lake City schools. One of the things that concerns me about this, several things concern me about it. Number one, I would welcome DOJ, the Department of Justice, to come in and investigate these allegations. One of the things that caught my attention in this article is that Williams with the NAACP said that the district has also violated the rights of students with special education needs by failing to conduct the annual reviews of individualized education plans. And then what's interesting is that the spokesperson for the district said in discussions with the board members, since Williams went public with her complaint about the IEP, members of the board were surprised to hear that that was an issue. And so it is. I mean, it's like when you watch any of the public board meetings, and I've asked people that are familiar with them, that has not come up in the last year. In fact, the opposite has come up. So this is really bizarre that if the superintendent, who claims, by the way, this was in December, he puts out this leadership plan, and it's transforming Salt Lake School District from good to great and establishing excellence as the minimum standards. To me, this is all just smoke and mirrors, because right here, one of the aspects of this plan is to establish a relationship with the Salt Lake City School District Board of Education built on trust and respect. And then his commitment was to collaborate with the Board of Education to develop a strategic communication plan and protocol for communication between the board and him. So then, you have to ask yourself, wait a second. From the public perspective, and by the way, I am aware that there are issues with the IEPs, but it's something that I thought at a couple of the schools was actually this district was the source of it, the bureaucracy, and that could be fixed by the administration, which the superintendent is over. So this is a bit disingenuous, I believe, by the superintendent to go to the NAACP so they can get DOJ to come in to investigate an issue that the board is saying they had no idea was an issue. But he's, claiming that he's going to communicate with them. So anyways, I believe that aspect of this complaint is going to backfire on him, because he's the one that's responsible for, if this is really going on, then he has the power and authority to fix that. The board already has a policy in place. And in fact, when he got here, special education was under one of the members of his cabinet. He moved it, and it's now under the associate superintendent who he hired. So this is all on him when it comes to the IEP issue. And like I said, at a minimum, he should be embarrassed by the fact that the route that he took to explain to the board that this was a problem. He goes to a nonprofit organization that has to tell it in the newspaper so the board can find out that there's an IEP problem. And I hope the board has had a meeting with him to say, hey, come directly to me, tell me what's going on. But I doubt that's happened. One of the other aspects of this complaint that we read about, it says that last year the district hired its first black superintendent. Now the NAACP alleges the board is trying to chase him out. The head of the chat, and then it says here that let's see, the part I wanted to read. Janetta Williams, president of the Utah chapter of the Civil Rights Group, said the school district's first ever black superintendent, as well as his assistant superintendent and other black officials in the district, have been subjected to a hostile work environment by board members. So, again, in closing here, this is a problem that I put at the feet of Logan Hall, because some of these assistants that are people that the superintendent has brought in, I made YouTube videos on them. Gwendolyn Johnson, who is the associate superintendent, and some of her background that clearly Logan Hall didn't even check into. And Kimberly Mackey is another one who is a member of the cabinet. She's still working at the district as far as I know, but this lady came in here saying she had EDD, a doctorate in education. She does not. We've been able to verify that. And then the State Office of Education, that's what that video is about, and their role in being complicit in this. But it all comes back to any of the conflict that's going on with employees on that district level could have been solved had this incompetent man done his job. And they need to replace him or put him somewhere, or, he needs to get mentored and stuff, because his failing to do his part on the most basic level is having a ripple effect throughout the district and causing other problems that's going to be costly.